the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. We're gonna talk now about the martyrs. As we said before, we are now almost in the 2nd century. We talked about the apologists who mainly lived in the 2nd century, less time, and we talked before them about the apostolic fathers, it's the 1st century, 2nd century. And we said that the church by the 2nd century started to grow, and because there was a lot of misunderstanding from the Roman Empire about the practices of the Christians, and because the Christians refused to comply to the orders and the instructions of the emperors to sacrifice for the idols, because the emperors had the belief that to have the blessing from the gods, all the citizens of the Roman Empire should sacrifice to the Roman gods, the idols. And Christians definitely were opposed to that. This was against their belief. That's why persecution started to arise, and also the need for apologetic work, as we talked last episode. So now we're going to talk about martyrs and martyrdom and the documents that recorded the stories of the martyrs. But again, I want to make a very quick review about why there was martyrdom, because as Christianity grew and Christians started to multiply in number, they have their gathering. There was a lot of misunderstanding about their practices, so persecution started to be directed against Christians. We also see that it's not all the time that the Christians were meant to be persecuted, because sometimes they were meant, persecution was directed to them, and we're going to see one of the fathers of the church, Tertullian, he was mentioning that. I'm going to read a quote about that. And also sometimes, again, because, for example, mid-3rd century, one of the emperors, he's named Decius, he ordered all the citizens of the Roman Empire to sacrifice to the idols. But Christians refused that. That's why they were persecuted. But on other times, there was persecution of Christians because of their name, because they are named Christians. And St. Tertullian attests to that saying, they think, the Romans or the emperors, they think the Christians the cause of every public disaster, of every affliction with which the people are visited. If the Tiber rises as high as the city walls, the Tiber is a river in Italy. So he's saying, whatever happens, whatever disaster happens in the empire, always the Christians are accused. This can tell us how persecution started to intensify against Christians. So he says, if the Tiber rises as high as the city walls in Italy, if the Nile in Egypt does not send its waters up over the fields, if the heavens give no rain, if there is an earthquake, if there is famine, straight away the cry is, whenever any of this happens, what the people would say? Straight away the cry is, away with the Christians to the lion. Throw the Christians to the lion, so we will, all these disasters will be gone away. Definitely, it's very unfair and very unjust, but this can give us an account of how persecution was severe against Christians that started even from the 1st century, but now we are talking about 2nd century. Tertullian lived in mid-2nd century until the 3rd century. We have documents about the martyrs. We have documents, and these documents started to be read in the church. The Christians started to give a lot of reverence to the martyrs, because as it is said, I think Tertullian as well, he says that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So because the church revered the martyrs and their blood and their witness through their martyrdom, we have records of their martyrdom, and it was read in the church. That's exactly what we are doing in our church, that we read the Synaxarion or the book of the saints. After the reading of the book of Acts or the Praxis, we read the stories of the saints, and many of them are of the martyrs. So that's exactly what we are doing in the Coptic Church. So we had documents like these documents. The documents of the martyrs or the martyrdom can be divided into three groups. We're going to focus on the first two of them. The first group is the official documents of the governors or the government, which recorded how the Christians were interrogated and asked about their faith and why they refused to worship the idols, and then the verdict of executing them or killing them because of their refusal to sacrifice to the idols. So this is the first category. These are official documents of the government. And under this category, we can see the martyrdom of St. Justin Martyr, whom we talked about last week or last episode, and another saint, he's St. Cyprian from Carthage in North Africa, 3rd century. So the first kind of documents is the official document of the government that records the martyrdom of the martyrs. The second group of documents, or the second kind of documents, are documents recorded by witnesses who witnessed the martyrdom of the martyrs, and they recorded what they have seen. So eyewitnesses to the martyrdom. The third documents are documents that were written later on, and some of those documents have some exaggeration and some legendary additions to it. We're going to focus in this episode about the first two. The official documents, are we going to talk about also the documents that are written by eyewitnesses, and one of the documents is even written by one of the martyrs herself, and we're going to talk about her. Her name is Saint Perpetua and Saint Felicitas, and they had their own diary. Part of the document is their own diary, where they recorded their feeling before being martyred, and then an editor added how they were martyred and recorded the remainder of the document. The first category, who are their martyrdom was documented in the official documents, St. Justin Martyr. And usually what happens is like that. The governor, or sometimes they call him the proconsul, the governor would ask the Christian martyr or the Christian before being martyred, and he would ask him, who are you? What's your name? Why are you Christian? What is your lifestyle? And then the martyrs or the Christians started to say that we believe in God. Yes, I am Christian, and I cannot renounce my faith. Then the governor would, it's recorded on the official documents, that the governor would ask him, would you renounce Christ and then give a sacrifice to the idol? And when the Christian would refuse, the document says, then the verdict is that he should be thrown to the beasts or killed by beheading or by any other way. So these are the first. And St. Justin Martyr, we read about, there is a document about his martyrdom the same way. The other kind, it's by eyewitnesses. And St. Polycarp, we mentioned St. Polycarp many times. He's one of the apostolic fathers who lived from the late 1st century, and he was a disciple to St. John the Apostle, and until mid 2nd century. He was martyred 155 AD. And his martyrdom was recorded. People witnessed the martyrdom and they wrote about it. We read in his story of martyrdom that the governor asked him, "Are you Christian? Why don't you save your age? And you are an old man, and why you would lose yourself and to be martyred? Renounce Christ." So he answered a great answer. He said, the proconsul asked him, "Swear, and I will set you at liberty. Reproach Christ." St. Polycarp said and declared, 86 years have I served him, and he never did me injury or harm or anything bad. How then can I blaspheme, renounce, or reproach? How can then I blaspheme my King and my Savior? I mean, it's a fascinating answer. How he's talking about someone whom he knew. For St. Polycarp, Jesus Christ is not a God who lives in heaven, but he is someone who had a close relationship with, to the point that he said, I lived with him all my life, 86 years, and he never did anything bad to me. How can I now renounce him? So then he was ordered to be martyred. Another martyrdom or story of martyrdom under this category, which was recorded by eyewitnesses, it was the martyrdom of one of the saints, a lady, and her name is Saint Perpetua, and she had a handmaid called, or a servant called Felicitas, and 3 men also were martyred with her. So 3 men and Saint Perpetua and Saint Felicitas. It's very fascinating story. This document about her martyrdom is 21 chapters. The first 2 are written by the editor or the eyewitness, and some are saying that the one who wrote this story is Saint Tertullian, or Tertullian himself, one of the church fathers, because Tertullian mentioned Saint Perpetua many times in his writings. And so the first 2 chapters written by the editor, who might be Tertullian, and then from chapter 3 to chapter 10, she recorded her diary, her story, while she was waiting to be martyred when she will be thrown to the beasts. It was her own handwriting. And then there is also one of the other martyrs who were martyred with her also write 3 chapters, and then the editor conclude the story. This story is very impressive, and it was very much again revered by the church, to the point that St. Augustine, he gave 4 sermons about St. Perpetua, and he was warning the people not to consider the story of St. Perpetua as important as the books of the Bible. I mean, you can imagine how much this story was revered by the people. So he was talking about her very highly, but he said, but remember, the Bible is more important. I mean, this can tell you how much this story were revered by the people. In the beginning of this document, it was mentioned the names of the martyrs, and then St. Perpetua started to write her own story. And St. Perpetua was a noble lady. Her age was 22 years old when she was martyred. She had a little son, a young son, and her handmaiden, Felicitas, she was pregnant when they were ordered to be thrown to the beasts. And she writes about her feelings. She was saying, I was so scared from the darkness of the prison where we were imprisoned. And she said it was very scary. She felt the darkness penetrates her soul. But then she prayed and she writes, I grew strong and was relieved from distress and anxiety about my infant. She was thinking of her little kid, what she's going to do with him. And the dungeon became to me as it were a palace. I mean, the dungeon or the prison, which was dark and very scary for her in the beginning, through prayers and asking God's grace, it became to her as a palace. So that I preferred being there to being elsewhere. You know, she felt that, yes, this is the place I wanna be there. Also in her story, she mentioned that her father came to her 3 times. He begged her. He pleaded with her. He threw himself on her feet, asking for her to deny Christ in order for her to be saved. And she refused. She documents how all the time she refused, and she told him that whatever God will allow for me, I'm gonna accept it, but I would never renounce Christ. And she gave him her little kid to be raised by her father. Also in the story, she was saying that the governor, or sometimes they call it the procurator, then delivers judgment on all of us. She writes, the procurator or the governor, then delivers judgment on all of us and condemns us to the wild beasts, that we're going to be thrown to the wild beasts. And we went down cheerfully to the dungeon. So imagine someone would hear a verdict of being thrown to the beasts, and she goes back cheerfully. She was happy. She knew that she's going to sacrifice herself to Christ, whom she loved. Another story, it was said, and by the way, she saw 3 visions. She writes also about 3 visions she saw that God was giving her, that she will be able to be victorious during the experience of martyrdom, and she will gonna get to heaven. 3 visions were given from God to her. And also the other martyrs, the men, one of them had also visions, and he recorded it in this document. Few days before their martyrdom, their being thrown to the beasts, her handmaiden or her servant Felicitas was pregnant, and she was scared. She was scared that she might, because the Roman law was preventing any pregnant woman from being executed or killed or martyred. So she was very scared that she wouldn't be martyred with her fellows. So she prayed, and all of them prayed together. And God allowed that she would give birth to her child early, prematurely, after 8 months. And we know that this is not easy. She wasn't in a hospital. She wasn't given an epidural injection, nothing of that. She was thrown in a prison, and she was ready to be martyred. And she was in too much pain, and she was crying from the pain. So the guards of the prison talked to her and told her, what you're going to do then when you are thrown to the beasts? If you are now, because of the pains of the labor, you are crying that much, what you're going to do when you will be thrown to the beasts? And she answered a great answer. She said, now it is I that suffer what I suffer. But then, when she will be thrown to the beasts, but then there will be another in me. Christ will be in me. He will strengthen me. As St. Paul said, that I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me. Who will suffer for me, because I also am about to suffer for him. So I'm suffering. my suffering of my pain labors, my pains of labor are just for my sake, because these are normal, natural pains. But the labors or the pains I'm gonna go through when I'm gonna be thrown to the beast, it is for God, and God will help me. And another, she also, it is written, the editor of the document says, the day of their victory shone forth, and they proceeded from the prison into the amphitheater. Amphitheater is like a theater, a big theater, where the people would come and watch how the beasts would eat and devour the martyrs. And they proceeded from the prison into the amphitheater, and as if to an assembly, joyous and of brilliant countenances. If perchance shrinking, it was with joy and not with fear. So they were going to martyrdom with joy, without fear. I mean, and again, they were shining. They were joyous. And they were telling the governor, now you judge us, but God will judge you later. You have the power to kill us, but God has the power to judge you later on. And it was said also that when she was given to martyrdom, San Perpetua, when a wild cow came and hit her, she tried to cover her because her cloth was torn. So she started to cover her body because, as the story says, she was rather mindful of her modesty than her suffering. She was caring for her modesty. I mean, it's a very important thing for her at that time. And when she was dying, she told some of the people who are willing or wanted to become Christians, catechumens, she said, stand fast in the faith and love one another, all of you, and be not offended at my sufferings. So love one another and never fear because of my sufferings. And it was said, but they first kissed one another that they might, the martyrs themselves, but they first kissed one another that they might consummate their martyrdom with the kiss of peace. As they were doing in the liturgy, they were doing in their gathering during the praying and gathering around the body and blood of Christ, they kissing each other as a sign of peace. They did that before their martyrdom. I mean, it's a fascinating story. I mean, this is how people lived Christianity and sacrificed for Christianity. It's a great lesson for us today that this is how valuable is Christianity that came to us, and we need to live up to that standard, and glory be to God forever. Amen.